Currently, Earth. On June 2nd, 1886, President Grover Cleveland becomes the first sitting president to marry in the White House. Cleveland entered the White House as a bachelor and left a married man and father of two. His new wife and First Lady, Frances Folsom, was 27 years his junior. Frances was the daughter of a former law partner in Cleveland's legal ward. Cleveland had literally known her since she was born. When she was 11, Frances' father died and Cleveland became her legal guardian, remaining close friends with her mother. His pet name for Frances was Frank. Observers thought Cleveland would marry his friend's widow and were completely surprised when instead he married Frances as soon as she turned 21. Grover Cleveland was a record setter. Not only was he the first president to serve 2 consecutive terms and the first president to get married in the White House, he and the First Lady Frances were also the first to witness their newborn child delivered in a White House bedroom, and the only ones for that matter. On June 2nd, in 1924, Congress enacted the Indian Citizenship Act. With Congress' passage of the Indian Citizenship Act, the government of the United States conferred citizenship on all Native Americans born within the territorial limits of the country. Before the Civil War, citizenship was often limited to Native Americans of 1/2 or less Indian blood. In the Reconstruction period, progressive Republicans in Congress sought to accelerate the granting of citizenship to friendly tribes. State support for these measures were often limited. In 1888, most Native American women married to U.S. citizens were conferred with citizenship, and in 1919, Native American veterans of World War I were offered citizenship. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act, an all-inclusive act, was passed by Congress. The privileges of citizenship, however, were largely governed by state law, and the right to vote was often denied to the natives of our country in the early 20th century. On this day, I give thanks in humble recognition to the first tillers of the ground that is our awesome nation, the natives of North America who laid the foundation and taught the first settlers from the Eastern Hemisphere the way of the land. On June 2nd, in 1953, Queen Elizabeth II is formally crowned monarch of the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth II was born on April 21st in 1926. She was the firstborn daughter of Prince Albert Frederick Arthur George, the second son of King George V. Her grandfather died in 1936, and her uncle was proclaimed King Edward VIII. Later that year, however, Edward abdicated over the controversy surrounding his decision to marry Wallace Warfield Simpson, an American divorcee, and Elizabeth's father was proclaimed King George VI in his place. During the Battle of Britain, Princess Elizabeth and her only sibling, Princess Margaret, lived away from London in the safety of the countryside, but their parents endeared themselves to their subjects by remaining in bomb-damaged Buckingham Palace throughout the German air offensive. Later in the war, Elizabeth trained as a second lieutenant in the women's services and drove and repaired military trucks. In 1947, she married her distant cousin, Philip Mountbatten, a former prince of Greece and Denmark who renounced his title in order to marry Elizabeth. He was made Duke of Edinburgh on the eve of the wedding. The celebrations surrounding the wedding of the popular princess lifted the spirits of the people of Britain, who were enduring economic difficulties in the aftermath of World War II. The first child, Prince Charles, was born in 1948 at Buckingham Palace. A second, Princess Anne, was born in 1950. On February 6, 1952, the royal couple were in Kenya in the midst of a goodwill tour when they learned the king had continued his eternity. Elizabeth was immediately proclaimed Britain's new monarch, but remained in seclusion for the first 3 months of her reign as she mourned her father. During the summer of 1952, she began to perform routine duties of the sovereign, and in November, she carried out her first state opening of the Parliament. On June 2, 1953, her coronation was held at Westminster Abbey. In almost 7 decades of rule, the love for Queen Elizabeth II remains strong around the world. She has traveled more extensively than any other British monarch and was the first reigning British monarch to visit South America and the Persian Gulf countries. In addition to Charles and Anne, she and Philip have had 2 other children, Prince Andrew in 1960 and Prince Edward in 1964.